Hello, welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I am your host, Corey Nathan. It's an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group. That's a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. Now, let's get right to it. I am so happy to be joined today by my lantzman. I called him. Rabbi Michael Holzman is the spiritual leader of the Northern Virginia Hebrew congregation and the founder of the Rebuilding Democracy Project, right up our alley. Rabbi Holzman has partnered with a variety of organizations like the Aspen Institute, friends of ours, and we're becoming even better friends with them as well. He's partnered with Philanthropy for Active Civic Engagement, the One America Movement, big fan. Not that you need my endorsement, but like all of these organizations, it's just incredible. And he is also the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America, partners with that organization as well. They examine the intersection of faith and democracy right in our sweet spot. Rabbi Holzman, it's so good to be with you. I'm so glad our friend John introduced us. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. And it's great to hear the list of like overlapping organizations because it means there's a field, right? There's an ecosystem that's grown over the past 10 years in this intersection with faith and democracy that really wasn't there before. And so that's helpful to have.
It really is, and I don't know if I've ever been able to roll out that particular Yiddish word, lantzman. It's Yiddish, right? Not Hebrew?
That I think is Yiddish. Yeah, it's
Okay.
definitely not Hebrew.
Yeah.
Either Yiddish or German.
But
Yeah.
because I was reading, I've been getting to know you through your work and your writing. I feel a particular kinship with you. Do you want to describe for folks that aren't initiated what lantzman is? I'm putting you on the spot now. Sorry.
I mean, I think that there's this concept in Judaism, Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh B'Zeh, that's really important. That all Jews are responsible for other Jews anywhere, and it comes from a time when there was really strict segregation between Jews and non-Jews. So their concern when they wrote this, the people who thought this way, was that we really have this incredible sense of obligation to take care of other people. They were focused on the Jewish community, which has played out over and over throughout history. I think it's less salient in American history right now because Jews are so well integrated into society, or at least some would say until October 6th, we're so well integrated into American society. But so there is a kinship that I think Jewish geography would be the other kind of parallel idea that like two Jews run into each other in Des Moines and they can figure out they're connected by at least a 1.8 degrees of separation or something like that. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about.
That was actually one of the things I was curious about. Have you studied your family's history? You make allusions to, you refer to the idea that you're aware that you're second or third generation removed from Ellis Island, but did you ever look into your actual family's history?
I mean, sure, yeah. I mean, my father's side, I guess I would be fourth generation on my father's side from Ellis Island, Ukrainian, Polish, Russian kind of polyglot, origins there. And on my mother's side, though, I come from German Jews who came to the United States 1840s,
Oh,
1850s. The kind of second wave of Jews to come to America. The first wave were Spanish Jews or Sephardic Jews coming from Amsterdam.
yeah.
But yeah, the older German community was really patriotic and really sought integration and adopted modern liberal ideas, classical liberal ideas about equal rights and I would say that they also subdued any kind of outward expressions of Judaism. So you go to a German Jewish synagogue and like in 1910, and they might not let you wear a yarmulke because that looks too Jewish, right? And they
Oh,
called themselves Hebrews or Israelites, to avoid the word Jew, which was derogatory at that time, and remained derogatory, in America through the 1960s and 70s for a lot of people.
oh, that's
Um,
interesting.
yeah.
I hadn't heard. I know that the Nathan line of my father's side of the family goes back to at least the 1840s, 1850s. And in fact, that part of the family did indeed come from Germany. One funny little, I don't know if I've ever told the story on the air, but I think it was the 1860 census, one of my grandfather's great uncles They, I guess there was a household in the Bronx where a number of the brothers lived, the relatives lived. And one was a rabbi, one was a bartender, one was a this one, but one of the great uncles was something like scoundrel or rapscallion or that was his profession that he on the 1860 census. So I
That's
think
awesome.
that now I know where it comes from. So they came, so all different parts of Eastern Europe, Germany, Poland, Ukraine, and I guess depending on which war happened last, it could have been Poland, it could have been Ukraine, it could have been Russia that they called it. What so did you look at the different circumstances? So first of all, the part of your family that's from Germany, was there a part of the family that stayed there through the Holocaust that you ended up losing, or?
Oh no, I mean my wife's family has that story for sure, and that's been a big part of our you know raising of our children, telling the stories of her mother's family escaping the Nazis, like as they're knocking on the door, quite
Yeah,
literally, 1937 Berlin. But my mother's family, they as far as I know, we didn't have branches in Germany
Mm.
by the time we got to the 20th century. They were
Yeah,
fully New York American German Jews. They didn't like when my mother married my father, it was considered a bit of a scandal because, like German Jews, sophisticated, integrated, didn't mix with those swarthy, Jews who just showed up as newcomers and like there's a great play by Alfred Urey called The Last Night of Ballyhoo that describes this playing out in a Southern Jewish community that like the German Jews and the Russian Jews stayed apart from each other.
right.
So that was my parents, kind of courtship and their wedding. And my parents only were able to have a chuppah at their wedding, like the traditional Jewish canopy.
Yeah.
My mother's family wasn't going to pay for it, and my mother and father ended up having one because the couple that was in the sanctuary before them left it there by accident. Like the florist just left, and
Oh,
so the chuppah was still there, and the rabbi did the wedding. And so
that's
like
great.
yeah,
It's funny.
that's my family.
I was at a memorial service. A dear friend of mine that I went to shul, I grew up going to synagogue with, and her father passed away a couple of weeks ago. And so our shul was a Orthodox synagogue in central Jersey. And she married a young man. Well, we are what we are. We're not young anymore. We're not old, but we're not young. Anyway, he was describing his relationship with his father-in-law at the dedication, and he said, they're conservadox, orthodox, and here I am, I'm reformed. I might as well be Episcopalian. So, um,
Well, as a Reform rabbi, I'm not going to exactly adopt that stereotype.
yeah,
There's a lot of jokes about Reform Judaism being Judaism light. It's
yeah,
not that. It's actually really like strongly American Judaism in the sense that Reform Judaism adopted an ethic of choice,
yeah.
um, and individual autonomy, which really are core principles of the American experience. And so we are, Reform is the largest denomination in American Judaism. And the ideas of Reform Judaism actually have become almost ubiquitous in other branches of Judaism today. Like there are female Orthodox rabbis now, right? Where did that come from? That came from us, right? So there's a lot of interplay between these different branches of Judaism. We don't have the same kind of theological denominationalism as Christians, but it is a little bit uncomfortable for Reform rabbis, especially, but Reform Jews to be considered the almost Christian branch of Judaism. That I'm not surprised, Corey, that you grew up in a community that like kind of had that stereotype, because like my father's family comes from that world, and that's like a natural part of holding on to a traditionalist point of view.
I think that's totally fair. I think our nuclear family took a lot of pride in, keeping kosher and going to shul on Shabbos and
Sure,
not being the quote unquote once a year Jews.
yeah.
So I was curious about so did you grow up in would you describe it as an observant home, an observant family?
So, yeah, my upbringing is a big part of my story, I think, when it comes to democracy. I grew up in a house that if we lit Hanukkah candles. And I mean, like, if we lit like four Hanukkah candles, I don't mean 4 nights, I mean four total candles a year.
Yeah.
That was a lot for us. My sister and I both had became B'nai Mitzvah. I would say in my case, mostly for the sake of having a party. Um, and we were like highly secularized. And then in high school, both my sister and I discovered Judaism in two very different ways. For her, I think it's more college, and she is now a fully Orthodox Jew,
Oh,
and I'm a Reform rabbi. So we both became observant in very different ways, but we came from a family where it would be a stretch to call us observant.
yeah.
However, I will say this. In my essay to apply to seminary, I described how my father's pride in Jewish ethics, he was a medical ethicist,
Oh.
really informed his whole identity, and he rooted that in his Jewishness.
Mm.
And my mother, who grew up with almost no Jewish practice at all. In fact, my mother's mother would have a Christmas party every year
Oh,
with 40 Jews,
wow.
all wearing red and green. That was the German Jews of New York City, right? And Lexington in '86, right? I mean, that's like that part of New York. And my mother, though, had this super deep sense of spirituality in nature. And I grew up in South Florida. We were on a boat a lot in the Everglades, and I can picture my mother's face, like closing her eyes, just taking in the light and the heat and the sounds of the water, and opening her eyes and seeing the birds and the trees and the light on the water, and that was like a formative part of my spiritual experience of God. And so the combination of my father's really strong cultural Jewishness and moral Jewishness, and my mother's really strong spirituality, like rabbinical school was in my path for sure.
Was it the philosophical framework of Reform Judaism specifically that prompted you down that route?
Well, for sure. I mean, I was supposed to be a doctor, like I guess all good Jewish boys, and now girls. And I did an internship in high school, and part of that internship allowed me to observe things in emergency rooms and things related to organ transplant. And one night I was present when there was a family, their son had died. He was a child, and they were completely bereft. And I can distinctly picture in my mind this family in like one of those small, rooms at a hospital, and they're sitting with the chaplain. I think he was a Catholic priest, and they're sitting with the chaplain, and I'm observing in the corner because we're asking the family to give permission for organ donation. And I was with my internship, my boss, and Les Olson, a great guy, and they were weeping, and they reached out and they touched the priest, and he looked at them and he said, "I think we need to pray." And I think we need to hear your son's voice and make this decision. And and they closed their eyes and they prayed and they looked at Les, my boss, and they said, "We're going to do it." And I remember that moment so clearly because while medicine is amazing and miraculous and very, very cool, the power in that room was not medical, right? The power in that room was prayer
Mm,
and the power of a relationship, a pastoral relationship between some people who are in the worst moment of their pot. I mean, the worst moment you can imagine, right?
yeah.
And that yet they found this like deep reserve of strength and power and comfort because they were connected to this priest and the whole tradition behind him, and that gave them the ability to really perform an act of miracle right there for 7 other people probably got organs from that child. And children's organs are tiny and other children can't get adult organs, and so like they really performed a miracle.
Mm.
And that was not a medical decision, and so as I'm going through pre-med classes in college, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, this is cool, but there's something cooler. And that led me to leave that path and pursue this one.
Wow.
Reform Judaism became the particular part of Judaism. Absolutely. I'm an intellectual. I like philosophy. I love reading. And not to say that Orthodox Judaism doesn't have all those things. It does for sure. But the the German intellectual tradition of Reform Judaism and the American part of Reform Judaism. And there's giants of American religion that came out of Reform Judaism, and that really drew me.
So there's I'm trying to imagine a conversation that you might have had with your dad and the disappointment he must have felt. My son's becoming a rabbi, not a doctor. Like that's only a comedy that a Jew can write, right? You know what
It
I mean?
was Yeah, my wife was in the car, I was in the back seat, dad was driving, mom was in the front seat. I mean, it was hard. It was a really
Oh,
hard
so
moment.
I was just joking. So it really
No,
was.
no, no, Corey. It was and my father. So my politics growing up and then going into college were pretty solidly on the left. I think I'm now probably what you would call like old school center right, but that doesn't exist anymore. But it's a endangered species. But but I was or maybe a centrist, but I was definitely on the left. And my father's politics at that exact same time when I went to college drifted hardcore to the right. I mean,
Oh,
over time. And my father died recently, and he by that point he by that point my father was fully MAGA,
oh, wow.
owned 19 guns,
Wow.
was afraid of everything they're talking about in the news today. All this reaction to Charlie Kirk is using all this language of leftist, extremist violence. And my father fully believed all that stuff. And like when people talk that way, they're not making it. This is not a conspiracy theory. Like they are talking out of a real conviction that they are living at risk. That I mean, Donald Trump was shot at. There's another guy who almost shot at him. I mean, like the risk is real, and in their mind, Charlie Kirk was assassinated. I mean, this is a real problem, and they assign that problem to a whole ideology and a whole world that they're living in. I don't think it's a true world because they think I'm the problem, And believe me, I don't want violence, right? But and so my father was in that world by the time he passed. He passed 6 months ago, and I love my dad dearly. But there were by the time he died, there were certain things that were like way off limits for us to talk about.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is very this is within the last year, you said?
Yeah, yeah, he passed March 3rd. I mean, so, when I think back to he eventually when I think back to that moment when I let him down and said I'm not going to follow in his footsteps. He was a doctor. He was a pediatrician. And when I think back to that moment when I let him down, I think that it was for him he felt a sense of personal rejection. That was bigger than just Jewish jokes. And then although I think there was a little bit of the Jewish ethnic thing going on there too. Um, but over the last, I mean, that was 25 years, 30 years ago. Over the last 30 years, my dad and I had so many conversations about the work that I do. He came and saw me preach and lead at my community. I mean, it's a pretty magical thing to be a congregational rabbi and have a community that studies Torah with you and prays with you and have a group of colleagues that collaborate to create holiness together. I mean, that's incredible. It's an amazing experience. And my father got to see me do that. And so over the years, he definitely let go of the disappointment. And then the one thing we could connect on was the fact that our democracy was broken. Like that was the
Mm.
only thing we could agree on at the end was like we are in bad shape with our democracy. And so that ended up being a real source of solace, I think, for our relationship.
So a lot of folks think generally and have some theories generally about why individuals go down this path, but they don't have as close of a relationship as their very father.
Yeah.
How do you think your father came under? And I think you and I would agree that a lot of this is a false illusion. The sense that this narrative that's being fed. I can only take so much Stephen Miller in one year, but I for some reason I've heard several of his outrageous temper tantrums over the last few days.
Yeah.
But I don't know if he really believes it. But if you're getting fed that, I can see why that would stimulate a sense of fear and anger and hatred. But I'm curious about your dad because that's you you traced with his evolution in his thinking. How did your dad go down that road? Was it the news feed? What was it for him?
So my dad was a fisherman, and my dad was many things. And one of them was being a fisherman, and his fishing buddy was his best friend. And the community that his fishing buddy created, and by the way, his fishing buddy's sons were like my older brothers. I mean,
Mm.
and I mean, I still have a deep love for them. And really, really deep love for them. And so they all started listening to Rush Limbaugh in the 1980s, started reading Limbaugh's book, started talking about the ideas that were circulating. My father told me once about an experience that changed his whole political outlook. He was a faculty member on the medical school at the medical school and in Miami, and he worked with a lot of Haitian kids, immigrant kids, really poor kids. It's a public hospital, right? He was an intensive care doctor. And one of the frustrations he had was that they wouldn't take medicine after they left the hospital. Like follow-up care was just a real problem. And he was at a faculty meeting, and he voiced that concern. And I wasn't there, I don't know, but my father's version of what he experienced after he voiced a concern saying the Haitian kids don't take their medicine after they leave was that he got shouted down as a racist because
Oh,
he was criticizing Haitians as an ethnic group, and he said to me, I was just trying to do good medicine,
yeah.
and there just was no room for that in the leftist ideology of this group of people. And so like that was probably around 1991, right, when that happened.
Wow.
And this is like when Gingrich is coming on the scene, and this is, so that's where it started. I think the professional disappointment he had, the social environment he was in. But by the time I think that all led him further and further to the right. But I think by the time we get to 2016, the biggest thing by far was that my father was getting a huge amount of information from YouTube
Oh,
and online media. And he stopped reading mainstream newspapers for sure, and he started reading the Epoch Times,
oh my God.
which is yeah, exactly. And he signed me up for the newsletter. I still get it monthly from Hillsdale. I read it. I read it religiously, no pun intended, because Hillsdale's newsletter probably goes to millions of people.
Yeah.
It's a far, far right-wing MAGA Christian college, and they wouldn't call themselves that, but whatever, that's what I would call them.
Is that the one Rufo came out of?
I don't know if I mean, he's definitely spoken there a million times. I've read a bunch of his articles, and a lot of people in the MAGA world came out of Hillsdale. And I bet you they have a lot of really good educational value in some ways, but it's an it's a closed system. And my
Yeah.
father was in that closed. By the time you get to 2018, 2019, 2022, it's a closed information world. It's a
Yeah.
world. I mean, just like I don't know, a year ago, I was in my dad's study and I saw he had one of these. This is a symbol, a pendant I wear to remember the hostages.
Yeah.
And my father had one of these hanging on the light in his study, and I said, Dad, why wouldn't you wear that outside? And he's like, I mean, because I know he's a big supporter of Israel, and he said, I wouldn't wear it because I took an oath as a doctor, and if I wear this, I may have to shoot somebody. And I was
Oh,
like, what? Like, what? Like, it blew my mind. I was like, what are you
I'm
talking
not
about?
making that connection.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't either. I said, Dad, explain this to me. He's like, well, there are people who, when they see me wearing this, will probably threaten me physically.
Oh,
This is dangerous to wear in public. And I carry. And so I have a concealed carry permit. If someone threatens me physically, I may have no choice but to use my weapon. And he was completely serious. He was completely serious. And so I don't think that I'm not saying anything that he wouldn't say in public. I mean, I think that world he lived in validated the risk that Stephen Miller and everyone, JD Vance and his massive podcast, you know, um, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about this real fear of people that they think are out to get them.
mm,
And I said to my father in that moment, I said, Dad, first of all, I'm one of the people you're talking about, right? I'm farther to the left than you, even though I'm pro-Israel. But that's a complicated story. But I said, Dad, like I wear this in public. I'm totally safe. No one's ever done a thing. I wear this all the time. I interact with Christians and Muslims. I interact with Palestinians. I've worn this having coffee with Palestinians. I said, Dad, you know, this is, I hate to break it to you, but you're not at any risk, but he was insistent. He was insistent that it's a dangerous world. He said to me, Michael, be careful.
Yeah, I'm noticing that there are daily, certainly weekly instances where there's an impression of something that doesn't align with the reality of that thing. For example, last week, tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk, and I saw kind of a lurching around for a storyline for Trump and MAGA and Stephen Miller and JD for folks to cling on to. And then it leaked down. There was one that's with in 24-hour cycles, one in particular started leaking down to folks that I talk to on a daily basis. One in particular that's still happening, where the impression is that they're all celebrating and mocking and dancing in the streets that about violence and assassination. They're a culture, and I had this conversation just yesterday afternoon with a really close friend of mine. I said, I'm not going to say his name, but I said, have you actually seen that from one of our friends, one of our contacts, whether it's somebody we play cards with or somebody that we know from the business community or somebody from, one of our,
Yeah.
like, or is that an impression and it's an impression because when it comes down to it, when there is a conversation, which usually doesn't actually happen, that conversation is, well, it's more nuanced. I disagreed with his views, but I really strongly supported his right to free speech. I disagreed with the way he did it, and he said some terrible, hateful things. But I'm not celebrating but it's the impression because they're hearing it. Oh, they want to kill you, and they are the culture of death and assassination, and so it's an impression more so than the reality of it. That's why our friend John. One of the ways that he pursued the campaign for the right for gay marriage to become law of the land, right? And it was decades that he pursued it. And he was saying that one of his most effective means of advancing this cause was by simply asking the question, well, do you know anybody who's gay? And
Yeah.
tell me about that relationship. And then once you put a face and once you kind of breathe humanity into this issue, then it becomes a lot more human. It becomes a lot more nuanced as opposed to an idea and they. So,
So I mean, this is core to why I love being a congregational rabbi in a local neighborhood, because I think there are not enough places where people encounter strangers, or maybe, not necessarily strangers, but people in that kind of weird space between friend and stranger, and, a community member that's kind of anonymous. There aren't that many places where you can sit down and actually have a conversation with someone like that. There's definitely not that many places where you can do it across generations.
yeah.
And so the neighborhood church, the neighborhood synagogue, the neighborhood masjid is one of the last places in America where you can do that. You can talk to somebody face to face in real life, not on a phone, not on a screen, and not that there's anything wrong with you and me being on a screen right now, but doing it in person, embodied. Like you read someone's emotion, you can feel the energy coming off a person when you ask a question or when you say something that might be hurtful, or if you get hurt, you can express that in a way that's measured and kind. It's really hard to be measured when expressing sadness or anger on a tweet. Like the medium is the message, right? Marshall McLuhan. And I think that the embodied personal, local neighborhood experience is going to have to be the antidote to the information bubble, the experiential bubble of being hooked into these storylines that you're describing that are all consuming.
Do you
That's what
th-
I think. Maybe that's also obviously like why I devote my entire career to working in a neighborhood synagogue.
I want to get to you have a long history going back to your childhood of a reverence for this American project, but I need to ask you something. Do you think that we as Jews have something in our cultural DNA or something that's kind of handed down to us generationally that we're we're more apt to have these types of conversations just because of the way that we like the Talmud. You read the Talmud and it's
Sure.
rabbis that are arguing with each other, but they're also arguing with guys like 3, 4 generations ago.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
we're just sort of brought up this way and this sort of comfortable with this sort of conversation, even having strong, deep disagreements. Do you think it's unique to something unique to Judaism? Or am I being kind of chauvinistic in that way?
Well, I can't say it's unique to Judaism because I don't know the other traditions well enough to say. I really don't know what happens at an Episcopalian Easter dinner.
Yeah.
Um, I
We don't mean to pick on the Episcopalians,
No, but
by the
maybe they're
way.
arguing. I don't know what they're doing. But I can tell you that like built into our ritual calendar, like it's not just a cultural thing. Like a Passover Seder is supposed to be an argument. Like the core of the experience
Right.
is
The
not
fair
just telling.
kasha. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not just supposed to tell the story of what happened. You're supposed to ask questions and argue about what happened and
Right.
argue about this. And the language of the Passover Seder, if anyone's been to it, the Haggadah, it's not a linear telling of the
No.
story. Moses' name does not even appear.
It,
So the whole thing is designed. I mean, ritually designed. So yes, and then I think that ritual system and the Talmud and the texts created a culture of dissent, a culture of intellectual exploration. Christianity, and definitely there are texts that criticize how the arguments over issues of law, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, that becomes a stereotype of Jews and a caricature of Jews being unethical but worried about legalism, right? I think the first part of that's unfair. I think the legalism part actually leads to a deep ethic of respect. I
mm,
think that's what happens. I mean, I've watched my Orthodox brother-in-law and nephew argue about some totally arcane little bit of like which Hebrew vowel goes on which word when they're at tefillah, when they're at worship. I watched this happen and I saw a joy in their eyes and a love between the two of them that I can only compare to the way that my father and I used to talk about fishing spots when we were on
yeah.
the boat in the Everglades. You
I
know,
I
that's the only thing I
remember
can compare it to.
I used to go to Shabbaton, NTSY,
Sure.
and I vaguely remember this argument. It wasn't really an argument. They were sort of putting it on for us, but the conversation was, well, you're not supposed to carry on Shabbos, right? Or something
Right.
along those lines. So the question was, well, what if you're eating and a crumb falls in your pocket? Like, if does that count as carrying? And if it's a crumb, okay, so maybe it's a whole piece of the bagel. How
Right.
much does it mean to, I love these conversations, maybe,
Well,
but
I mean, now we know where Seinfeld came from, right? I mean, that's, I mean, it's absolutely like, George Costanza is he is a Talmudic character, right? I mean, so and he's not, and that's right. He's not a Jew. He's an Italian, right? So I don't think culturally it's limited to Jewishness. I do
right.
think it absolutely affected the culture of the United States. I think the beautiful stories about Scalia and Ginsburg and their
Mm.
friendship, and I think that's absolutely a reflection of
Wonderful. Yeah,
of
wonderful
that. Yeah.
conversations, wonderful dialogue. So, as I mentioned a minute ago, you've talked about a reverence you've had from an early age for certain American symbols, even rituals like pledging the flag. Was there someone in particular who helped to instill some of that in you, or were there other experiences that nurtured that sense of appreciation?
That's a good question if it was a single person. I mean, I definitely think um, there were just moments. There's like snippets, little snippets. I had a fifth grade teacher who told me about what it was like for her husband to be in the Air Force at Homestead Air Force Base during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I went to that same teacher took us to Washington on a fifth grade trip on a train on Amtrak from Miami to Washington, and we went to Mount Vernon, and I'll never forget seeing Mount Vernon for the first time, in George Washington's home, and as fifth grader, and I remember, being on the boat once and seeing the U.S. Coast Guard, rescuing a bunch of immigrants in a raft that was like from Cuba, um, that was falling apart. I mean, just feeling really proud of what the Coast Guard was doing there. I mean, just like little snippets here and there. So I don't think it was one thing, um, but it was, when I started getting into the documents, when I started reading the documents carefully, like it's really hard to read the Declaration of Independence carefully, the whole thing, and not be swept up with a sense of deep pride in America and also deep desire to address the problems of America, right? Like he talks about Native Americans as savages, and he talks about the British, who they're about to fight, as brethren. And I'm like, wow, that's a really big problem, to do that. And yet I felt like so motivated by that paradox. I think this is where the Trump administration has it all wrong. Like by taking that stuff out of the Smithsonian, the unpleasant truths of America, out of the museums, I don't think they're going to actually make people more proud of America. I think what they're going to do is they're going to make the pride more shallow, because a pride that's built on complexity and paradox can be incredibly strong. I mean, you just have to look at the pride that most African American families have in America. I mean, huge patriotism, huge military service, big traditions of patriotism in the African American community. And if anybody in this country has a right to be, anti-America, it would be African Americans,
Hmm.
maybe Native Americans, but by and large, African Americans are patriotic. So I think that you know, I don't. I think that when you go deep on the documents, when you read Frederick Douglass, he's so proud of
Yeah.
America, of what America is supposed to be. So I cannot watch the "I Have a Dream" speech or read the letter from Birmingham jail without feeling chills. I can't. Like it's just that's my experience of reading those documents.
And what prompted you to start to focus specifically at the intersection of faith and politics?
So, so 2014, 2015, I'm having these problems with my dad. And also I'm seeing people come into my office for pastoral care to talk about like their marriage because their husband won't turn off Fox News, or their kid is so far to the left they can't tolerate it. I mean, like it's becoming a pastoral problem, right? And then simultaneously, 2015, 2016, a bunch of really long-term, decades-long problems in the way our synagogue governance was set up leads to a kind of internal synagogue meltdown over a budget issue. By the way, like that's something that can happen to any synagogue, any church. Just people not knowing how to solve problems and having
Yeah.
bad governance habits, not the board not trusting the finance committee, not trusting the executive committee, not trusting the past presidents, that kind of stuff. And I saw this convergence between my personal experience, what I was reading about in books and in the newspaper, what I'm seeing on my pastoral couch, and what I'm seeing in the governance of my synagogue. I'm seeing all this convergence, like, oh, this is not really about any particular policy. This is not about gay marriage. This is not about guns. It's not about abortion. This is about culture. This is about civic health. This is about like the way we talk to each other and what helps us learn how to talk to each other. Like what are the technologies that encourage us to respect difference, and what are the things that actually encourage us to hate difference and to fear
Mm.
difference, right? And in 2016, 17, that drove us to say we got to create some way to heal our synagogue and to help people make sense of this moment. I love Curtis Chang's way of saying his podcast is helping lovers of Jesus make sense of the world, right? Like my job is to help people who read Torah make sense of the world through the language of Torah.
Yeah.
And so um, Torah defined for me broadly as the corpus of Jewish writing, for centuries. And so I said, let's not create another program that's off on the side. Let's not do like just another thing added to our calendar. Let's take something that's like the center of our community, which is Torah study on Saturday morning,
Yeah.
and let's use that time to talk about America and talk about civic culture. And let's use documents that we all agree are hard for us to study and like hard for us to grapple with, that we disagree on. Let's use documents that raise tough subjects, but documents that we also venerate and that we also hold as what John Meacham calls American scripture, right? And so Meacham uses that term so beautifully because he's talking about a moment when a speech. He's got this podcast. It's called "It Was Said." He talks about the moment when a speech turns into scripture, and scripture is something that binds people together. Scripture is something that lifts you up even when you disagree. And so it's the power, the passion of the language, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively, that like lifts you up. I got to fix this. That's what I
Yeah.
feel like when I read Savages in the Declaration. That was our experiment. We started it on Saturday morning in 2018, literally 2 weeks after the Pittsburgh shooting, the synagogue shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue, and we've been going pretty much once a month ever since. Like once a month, we don't study the regular Torah portion in its entirety.
You're still doing that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, like we do it all the time. I just we look at a speech from Teddy Roosevelt that he gave at the Sorbonne about the virtues of citizenship. We look at Ursula K. Le Guin's story, the ones who
Wow.
walk away from Omelas. Like we look for documents that can help us have meaningful conversations about what it means to be American.
Wow. That could be a really healthy exercise. My experience, I'm a Jew, but I believe in the whole Jesus thing. So I've been going to these not just churches, but like when I first started going to church, it was fundamentalist, evangelical, Baptist. John MacArthur. I don't know if you're familiar with John MacArthur's work, but he sees Calvinism as being too liberal. But so when I see a flag near a pulpit, it gives me great pause, because the proclivity in a lot of the churches that I've been a part of is to confuse those things, to fall prey to the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me.
Right.
So it gives, but the way that you describe, I think there's a way to do this, and the way that you describe it. Let me ask you this. So you it seems like in reading a lot of your work, it seems like your failures or past decisions that you came to regret are a part of what led you to figure out healthier ways of I here's the quote, incubating democratic practices,
Yes.
to figure out
Yes.
healthier ways of doing. Can you talk about a couple of those instances?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think every pastor, every clergy person, every cleric in America knows the moment, every cleric knows the moment when there's a thing that's got to be decided or done. And you know that there's going to be some cranky people who are going to make a problem. And so instead of actually like doing the right thing, which is like following your procedures and your governance norms and bringing it out in public, because board meetings are by law open to the public unless you're, an executive session, right? So at least in my synagogue. And so instead of doing it that way, people will create a task force over on the side, maybe talk about it offline. There's, some boards where it's common, like call every single individual on the board and talk them into the thing before you have the vote. And the one person you don't call is the one cranky person, this happens everywhere. This happens.
Yeah.
I understand it's old school arm twisting politics that probably happens on Capitol Hill, but it's not the way our traditions are supposed to. It's not the Talmudic culture that we described earlier in this conversation, right? It's
Yeah.
not the Seder. It's not open. It's not intellectually curious. And so it just made me feel icky doing that. I was doing that. I was watching it happen in my synagogue. I've seen it happen in other synagogues I've worked in, and every rabbi and pastor and imam in America knows these habits. And so it's kind of like battlefield survival technique. And I said, I want to find a different way. And so this is interesting. Like there was a situation that came up a few years after our crisis. About 6 years later, we were making a decision about paying off our mortgage and prioritizing our donations to how they were going to go. And some group in the synagogue wanted to use the money to make a capital improvement to the building, and another group said, no, 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 it has to go only to the mortgage and paying it off. And at first, people were scared. And then I said, look, we've been doing democracy work for 6 years. If we can't have this conversation with respect out in the open, then it's all been a failure, right? And so the president led what I think is one of the most beautiful meetings I've ever seen. I mean, it was like super strict on Robert's rules, but it was so careful to make sure that the one guy basically who dissented, it was so careful to make sure he got his say and he got a chance to be heard and listened to, and no one interrupted him and no one shouted him down and no one mocked him. And he lost the vote for sure, right? He lost the vote. And afterwards, he was so grateful, right? He was so
Just
like,
to be
wow, I
heard.
feel, yeah, like like democracy depends upon losers staying in the system.
Yeah.
Like, if every time you lose an election, you want to leave the system, well, then there is there's no democracy, right? You have to have losers to be in a democracy. Danielle Allen, in her book Talking to Strangers, she writes about the need for rituals to reassure people. That's what an inauguration is supposed to be, right? That's what the counting of the electoral vote is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a ritual that reassures everybody we're still in this, even though you just lost.
Right.
January 6th was so painful to me because it was clear they were attacking the ritual. The
Right.
ritual of unification was the thing they were attacking. And I was like, oh, like that's like that that goes like right to the guts of what holds us together, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And that history, there's attempts to be rewriting, re-narrating, recrafting what
Yeah.
that day was about. But there's no truthful way to reframe that other than an attack on one of the very pillars of this American project, the peaceful transfer of power.
Yeah, and then there's no healing. Like there's no healing. Like say what you say about whatever you feel about Charlie Kirk. The fact remains that somebody standing on a college campus, a place that's supposed to be for open ideas, you know, inviting others to engage in intellectual discourse, that person was gunned down in the middle of that campus in front of those students, on video, and that's just an active civic wound,
Mm,
and the question is, how do you heal the wound? I don't think that I think everything that's coming out of the administration right now is just alcohol on the wound, just pain and tearing
yeah.
the wound more. The more you can tear that wound open, the better that wound is for them, and the worse it is for America. And like that to me is really what scares me.
There was a brief moment where every other past living president struck the right tone. They all had different ways of saying it. Obama, Bush, Biden, Clinton, they all had different ways of saying it, but there was agreement upon this is wrong. Political violence is wrong. It has to be condemned. And we need to figure out how to disagree better, and honor because that's, again, regardless of what you think about a lot of the things, you could disagree with a lot of the things he said, even the way he said it, even his style. I call it stacked deck argumentation, like at times sort of intellectually dishonest to lead somebody to be able to slam dunk on him. But he was still engaging in speech. He was still engaged. He was doing the project, right?
Right.
I don't want to get too diverse because I really do want to ask you about rebuilding democracy project. So it sounds like these experiences led directly to that. Is that right?
Absolutely. So we created this internal body called the Rebuilding Democracy Project here at the synagogue. And then that led to all these programs. And then we started to share those programs with other rabbis around the country. And we created something external called American Scripture Project. And that's at americanscripture.org. And that still is going, americanscripture.org. And with that, we provide resources for rabbis. That's the direction right now. But for rabbis to use American texts in conjunction with the weekly Torah portion. So every week in the Jewish calendar, there is a portion of the Torah. You know this, right? And we connect that portion, a theme or a word, something in that portion, to a text from America that tells a story about America, and then we provide some questions, 3 or 4 questions, to help people think about a big narrative issue. So like sometimes it's just a single word and the connection's a little bit loose, and sometimes the connection is really strong, like really powerful. And so we provide these materials. My hope is that we're helping seed a new clerical habit, a new tool in the toolkit of the average teacher of scripture that will pick up the Bible and think what in our national treasury of documents speaks to the same thing that the Bible's speaking to, and what can the Bible say about America? What does America say about this idea? What does this document say? And then facilitate a conversation that's really about like our civic dreams, our civic hopes, our civic anger. Provide an environment through experience of Scripture. Provide an environment that helps people heal and helps people gain a sense of agency.
What are some of the ways that you keep the things that should be separate? What I was describing before, like you end up with the Trump Bible, for example, the
Yeah.
Mac Bible or whatever. What are some of the ways that you inoculate yourself from, committing, uh, going
Heresy.
going against the first commandment?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's a really great question. I mean, I fall back on there's a really long tradition of pastoral leadership prior, like up to Eisenhower, pretty much. That's mostly coming out of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant houses of worship, also Reformed Jewish houses of worship, right? There's a long tradition of pastoral preaching about
Mm,
the civic virtues we share, right? And I stick to the American ideals that we share because those ideals are based on religious ideas, right? They come in the Declaration from Genesis 1, 26, 27. We are created in God's image. That's what they were thinking about.
yeah.
And so I draw on documents from that era that talk about civics without getting into theological, like bringing America back into the theology of Judaism. I don't, you know, uh, learn my Judaism from America. I use my Judaism to help talk about America. And
Mm,
so I have to monitor. It's a very good question. I have to monitor the directionality of this and be very, very clear on what's Jewish and what's America
yeah.
and where the overlap is and where the overlap isn't, right? And so, that's a big part of navigating this overlap. I will say you can go to certain sanctuaries,
Yeah.
synagogue sanctuaries, and the temple in Atlanta, for example. There's a famous speech. Actually, Charlie Kirk's assassination makes me think of this speech because the week after the temple bombing, that temple was bombed in Atlanta during the civil rights era. And it was bombed because the rabbi was an outspoken proponent of a civic form of integration, that is racial integration that kept the peace. He was trying to push the project of racial integration without creating violence and discord. And the synagogue was bombed. The morning after the bombing, he has his staff place on the sign in front of the building the sermon topic for the following Friday. And the sermon topic is, and none shall be afraid, right?
Mm,
That's the sermon topic. And where's he getting that from? He's getting that from George Washington's letter to the synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island, where George Washington is quoting from the Bible, describing the vision of every man sitting under his vine and fig tree, and none shall be afraid. Like, so that's a very deliberate effort by Rabbi Rothschild to restore hope by drawing on both our like universally loved George Washington tradition and our biblical tradition simultaneously. So it's a dance. I mean, it is a dance, but you gotta like recognize. And I'm like a seminary trained pastor. Like I'm a rabbi. I can recognize what's Jewish and what's not Jewish.
yeah.
Like I can see that's America. This is Judaism. That's my job.
So one of the I have a lot more reading to do, and I'm so glad that I've been introduced to your work. But one of the helpful, it's almost like a toolbox that I was introduced to: 10 faith habits for
Yes.
effective citizenship.
Yes.
So if you could tell us what the purpose of it is, and then maybe talk about some of those habits.
Sure. Sure. So almost all faith traditions share certain habits, right? Um, we we love sacred space. We love taking a space and saying this room is different. You behave differently in this room, right? That's a habit, right? We love, like I've been talking about, the power of scripture, right? Taking a text and treating it differently than you treat, the average piece of writing that you pick up every day, the newspaper or something, right? We love silence. Like we use silence as a time to process our emotions and what we're hearing. Like I mean, like what Charlie Kirk was doing and what he does on campus, that's debate. That's not silence. Like that's that and that there's a place for that. Like that's not a faith habit. Like the faith community sometimes, I mean, we once had a public conversation about gun control, and one of our members told a story about having to hold her firearm because in the basement because she was sitting with her neighbor. Her neighbor was suffering domestic violence. The neighbor's husband was coming to attack her. They both ran down to the basement. She's holding her gun, waiting for this guy to come down the stairs and knowing like I might have to shoot him. And she told that story. And the only thing I could do after she finished the story was say, we need to sit in silence. We just need to sit in silence. And that's a faith habit, right? So there are things like ritual, prayer, music, garments, like wearing vestments, right? Like these things, like I've once or twice I've worn my talit at a board meeting because I knew the topic was emotionally difficult for everybody. So I went, I got my talit, I put it on, and I sat in the middle of the room and said, "Let's talk," and we're gonna. It's a board meeting, but we're also human, right? This is hard. So like there's tools in the faith toolkit that are not theologically particular. Okay, our each of our theologies explains them differently, but they all, in different ways, can be applied to good governance, to respectful deliberation, honored dissent, right? The principles of liberal democracy. John, our friend John, Roush, he says like liberalism was not meant to be a self-sustaining, totally isolated thing. It depended upon a larger field of ideas that were provided by things like religion,
Yeah.
and that's what faith habits do.
Yeah. I want to start to wrap it up, but we've mentioned Israel a couple of times.
Yeah,
I
sure.
just wanted to ask you how you're processing we're coming up on the 2 year anniversary of October 7th. How are you processing what's happening there?
Yeah, I was a little bit afraid that you would ask this, and also because I listened to your podcast, I kind of am reassured because I kind of know the environment is a safe one. Um, it's really hard. It's really, really hard right now. I absolutely, absolutely can't stand Benjamin Netanyahu. I have felt that way for a long, long time, going back to the 1990s. I don't agree with his political techniques, tactics, and let alone his political philosophy and his policies. So that was all in place on October 6th, and then of course October 7th happens, and I mean Jews are still feeling the trauma. It's not post-trauma; it's current trauma, and of course the Israeli members of my congregation and the members who have strong family in Israel, the members who have kids serving in the IDF, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a thing, and risking their lives. That I have to pastor that. So that's really really hard. And simultaneously, the high holy days are upon us. Like I
Yeah.
am in the midst of the season of moral introspection and the asking of hard questions. The liturgy does not really let you hide from the issue of
Yeah.
sin. And you cannot look at what's happening in Gaza right now. And you certainly cannot listen to the rhetoric coming out of the Netanyahu government right now. I mean, people bragging about Gaza is burning, and Netanyahu just the other day saying that Israel should be a super Sparta, I mean, and go it alone as a warrior culture and all this stuff. Like, I can't listen to that and then read the liturgy of Yom Kippur and hold those two thoughts in my head. I mean, it's causing me a severe headache to try and hold those two thoughts in my head at the same time.
Yeah.
And I have to preach to my congregation about this stuff on Yom Kippur, which I am working very hard at right now.
It's yeah, it's hard. For what it's worth, I just spent the better part of a week with my young cousins from Israel. They were visiting here, both of whom served in IDF. They're in their 20s. And they they both shared similar sentiments as you do. Unwavering support for Israel, obviously, while at the same time having deep, deep concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed a friend. I interviewed a kid. No, he's not. He's an adult of the adult child of a friend who is was in the IDF and was responsible for commanding a unit that was supposed to provide security for humanitarian aid distribution. Right? The Gaza Health Foundation. Well, the
Yeah,
security for the Gaza Health Foundation is provided by the IDF. That's security. And this guy was given that task, and he's like, I was given no training, no equipment, a job that was completely impossible to do. Like, and I have to follow orders because I'm in the military, and that's what you do in the military. You follow orders. And I asked him, well, was it morally hard for you? He said, of course it was morally hard. It was morally hard also because it was tactically impossible, to treat these people like human beings and do what I was being asked to do. And so, I mean, I think that the real human experience of this war by Palestinians and Israelis um, is um, is situated in a context of pragmatic impossibility, the way things are set up, Hamas and Netanyahu both favor conditions that make peace impossible.
Yeah.
They don't, and so the people who are on the ground living in that environment, they deal with pragmatic impossibility all the time,
Yeah.
and they share that frustration and that pain on top of all the other traumas that are going on. Right. So I try and talk to Palestinians directly, not advocates for Palestinians, but Palestinians. I try and talk to Israelis directly because the advocates who are one step removed are often much more militant, much more difficult to have a meaningful conversation with because they're defending ideologies. They're not defending pragmatic realities, you
You know,
know?
it's interesting. You just made me think of Golda Meir's now infamous statement, when my adversary love their children more than they hate me, will have peace. Um, and there was hope for peace because at least one party in this equation had the right balance there. But now it seems like a significant Netanyahu, the way he's leading, he hates his enemy more than he loves his children, more than he loves Israel.
Well, and both sides do everything they can to magnify the hate and justify the hate being bigger than the love, right? They do that
Right.
to their own people and they do that to the other side's people. So it's so much easier to inspire hate. It's so much easier to inspire people to be afraid than it is to do the hard work of helping people imagine that the person outside your tribe could possibly be trusted. Like that's much harder work. And so yeah, I mean, I think Golda Meir was making a good point, except for there probably were plenty of Palestinians at that time who loved their children more than
Sure.
any Jews. So it was simultaneously a helpful construct, but also an unfair way to describe the enemy, right?
Yeah.
So like that's the whole history of this conflict is going back to the beginning, is that unfairness on both sides.
Yeah. Well, a couple more questions and then a piece of business. The TPNR question.
Sure.
We've sort of been talking about this, and a lot of your work is focused on this. And that is, what do you think each of us can do to be able to share space with, have better conversations with, and perhaps even nurture relationships with people across our differences, like you and your dad? People who have different backgrounds and beliefs than we do, who get their news from different sources than we do. How can we do better at talking politics and religion without killing each other, or is it even possible?
So the what? Yeah, sure. I love this question. I would say that the answer is love. And love is the biggest bridge builder there is. Um, I don't mean intimate romantic love, although that's part of it. I think, and love between parents and children, that's part of it. Love between students and teachers, that's part of it. Love between neighbors is part of it. I think we have to put ourselves in environments and situations that help remind us we're supposed to love each other and that we have the capacity to love each other. Now, the reason why this is an interesting thing to answer on your show is because I talk politics through religion.
Yeah.
And so the religious piece helps magnify love. And so what I would say to people is, find a church or a synagogue or a mosque where that's the ethic, is how to talk to the other, and let the power of the spiritual experience and all of its diversity, between institutions, let that help you find love for the people you're afraid to talk to, and strengthen that love so that even if it gets hard, you can turn to them and say, I really love you and I want to stay in relationship with you, despite what you're saying is causing me great pain,
Yeah.
you know, and or offense or whatever it is. And if you don't find it in the first institution, go to another institution and keep looking till you find one.
Keep looking.
Keep looking. Yeah.
It's a process. Yeah, it sure is. That's a good word. Now you get to turn the tables on me. Do you have any questions for me?
Well, I do. So I am working with a group of colleagues, Jewish, Christian, Muslim colleagues, to try and create a celebration for America's 250th anniversary next summer. Our effort is called Faith 250. The idea being that we know the celebration next summer is going to be politicized, and it's going to be also like a lot of distraction and joy and parties and that sort of thing. And parties are great. I'm all in favor of that. However, my question for you is, what advice do you have to get Christians to embrace the 250th as an opportunity for talking with non-Christians or talking with other denominations of Christians about America. Like, what can we do to get Christians to reach out to their neighbors and have little conversations in their local communities about America? Faith 250 provides a guide, but I'm wondering, like, what would encourage Christians to do this work from the position of their faithfulness?
Wow. So here's what comes to mind. And I'm going to need to think a lot more about this. If we visit again next week, next month, next year, I want to continue thinking about this. Here's what comes to mind is we are fighting uphill and serious headwinds are coming up against us. And the number that comes to mind is 82. 82% of evangelicals voted for Donald Trump. But that means that a lucky number didn't, 18, right?
So Jewish.
So
Okay, yes. You have to
so
explain that sometime.
yeah, so I think of that 18. That means that there's a remnant of people that are still going to fundamentalist evangelical churches that didn't vote for Donald Trump. Maybe we could start there, because they are in a they are better positioned to have conversations within their churches about and then to grow organically. The way that Chabad kind of is evangelistic, right? But
Sure.
evangelistic within Judaism,
Yes.
evangelistic in terms of a Jewish person, okay, so you don't keep kosher yet, so they're building a project from within, right?
Right.
So
Right.
I think of that 18%. Again, this is a really rough answer because I hadn't thought about this project in quite those terms. But yeah, the glimmer of hope, the green shoot, if you will, is that 18% that didn't vote for Trump.
Well,
Maybe,
I want to try and find that 18% and maybe the next 10%, that are
yeah.
adjacent. I want to find evangelical, non-evangelical, all kinds of Christians, Muslims, all kinds of Jews. I want to find institutions and clerics like me, colleagues, who are interested in the 250th anniversary of America's existence and the Declaration of Independence as a real opportunity to, what I like to say, flood the zone with hope, right? I
Mhm.
want to flood the zone next summer with hope built in little conversations happening in local communities in person everywhere. And I really desperately need evangelical Christians to be a part of that.
Yeah. Well, I will say that you're already on the right track. The candid, hard truth is that to get to that 18%, you're going to have to go through a lot of rejection, a lot of, harsh, perhaps confrontations. But the fact that you were in conversation with David French and Curtis Chang, they are part of that remnant, I believe. And you're not going to find a more, if you're thinking about conservative theologically, when we strip away the conservative among a lot of other words like evangelical, even Christian, has been hijacked. The words like that have been hijacked in this era.
Sure.
But when we think about true conservative theology, guys like David French and Dr. Moore, who are all and Curtis are all part of the after party, and Nancy, David's wife, are all part of the after party. That's a good place to start, and they can then expand from within with your help and be in conversation. So I think you're on the right track.
Well, I'm, if anyone listens to this and they hear, this and they're thinking about the 250th as an opportunity, faith250.org is the sister website to American Scripture Project.
Yeah,
Faith250.org is the hub where we're sharing information about how to form your own small group conversation about America next summer, or actually leading up to next summer. And
yeah.
please be in touch because you said earlier in this conversation, like, where did you get your patriotism from? Um, and I just think about this 250th anniversary as like the one time in my entire adult life where I'm going to have this chance to look at this incredible human creation called America and get people, maybe, hopefully, be a part of a conversation about what we want this thing to be. This is a real opportunity, and I just don't want it to go by with a picnic. I want it to go by with deep conversation.
I cringe at the thought of, 2026 and other events that are coming up, that the current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is the classical narcissist, and that he has to be the bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral. Whether it's here in LA, we're going to have the World Cup, or in 2028, we're going to have the Olympics. But I'm hoping that maybe there'll be some chastening, like we saw on his birthday parade, or other times when he's gone into stadiums and maybe hasn't been met with the applause and worship that he so desires. That maybe they'll pull that back and won't put him in those, so that he can't steal it from the rest of us. But I guess that's a whole other conversation. I do need to ask you. So AmericanScripture.org, faith250.org.
That's right.
We're going to put those in the show notes. Rebuilding Democracy Project.
That's the internal
Okay.
synagogue thing.
All right. So we'll be sure to put AmericanScripture.org, faith250.org. And if folks wanted to follow you and learn more about your work, where should they go?
I mean, I write from time to time. I write on a blog, a Substack called The Unpopulist, which I love.
Yeah, it's fun. It's good
And
stuff.
I write on there from time to time. And if you're in the local Northern Virginia community, you're welcome to come to shul. Services are 7 p.m. Friday night,
All right.
Um,
Will I get some good challah and wine afterwards? I mean, are we going to do
I
the
wouldn't say good. I would say, especially the wine
some
is probably
cholent, some
mediocre.
something? Come on, man.
Yeah, the wine is probably mediocre, but the challah is decent. I think the real joy when it comes to food is we have different volunteers bring bagels and lox
Okay.
on Saturday morning for
Okay.
Torah study. That group is pretty competitive about who gets the best bagels. So
Oh, all
yeah,
right.
yeah,
Next
yeah.
time I get there, I get to DC area about these days about 2 or 3 times a year. So I'm gonna have to put that on my list.
If you're Corey, if you're in DC in Reston near Dulles Airport, if you're near us,
That's what I fly into. My wife works for United, so I fly into Dallas.
perfect.
So,
9 a.m. Saturday morning. Come on by. You'll be a part of a great Torah study group, and I'll introduce you, and maybe it'll bring back memories.
oh man, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Rabbi Michael Holzman. It was so great. I'm so glad that John introduced us. I'm so glad to now know about your work, and this could be the start of a beautiful friendship. Thanks so much for doing this.
I hope so. Thanks so much, Corey.
You bet, you bet.
Thank you.
And
Bye-bye.
so we did cover a lot, but is there anything important that we haven't talked about that you want to add before we wrap it up?
I think we can save that for a future conversation.
Next conversation. All right. As always, if you dig what we're doing, remember to follow the show, write the review. It really does help. And now you can watch these conversations on YouTube, youtube.com/at politics and religion. And I am at Corey S. Nathan, at Corey, S as in Sam, Nathan, at Corey S. Nathan on all the socials. I'm especially active on Substack these days, so check that out. Now go talk some politics and religion, or politics through religion. Is that how you put it? Politics
That's how I put it.
through religion, with gentleness and respect. And have a great week.